On Landline today, commercial fishers fear livelihoods are on the line ahead of planned changes to gillnet fishing.
It's going to be devastating. There's a whole lot of support industry that rely on the fishermen for survival.
Adding a bit of sparkle to one of Australia's premier wine regions.
This can be a leader. It can show that Margaret River as a whole can actually produce good sparkling wines.
And we visit an historic property set up to help ag-research in memory of two young men who made the ultimate sacrifice.
It's pretty crazy to think that people my age were doing these heroic acts in countries they never even thought about before, and yet here I am just on a farm doing research.
Hello, I'm Pip Courtney. Welcome to the program. Gillnet fishing will be phased out in the Great Barrier Reef by 2027 to protect dugongs, dolphins and turtles. Late last year, the Queensland Government announced a plan to extend restrictions to the Gulf of Carpentaria. Commercial fishers say their livelihoods will be destroyed and Australia will be forced to import fish. Landline's Helena Baptikoski reports.
It's 6 a.m. and Corumba's commercial fishers are getting to work. A boatload of barramundi and king salmon is being unloaded, ready for sorting and packing. This fish will make its way to the big markets of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. Fishing is worth $30 million annually to this small town in the Gulf of Carpentaria. And it's in for a shake-up. Regulations on gillnets, which most fishers here use, are set to be introduced in May. It's a continuation of restrictions along Australia's east coast to phase out the nets by 2027. The federal and Queensland governments made the announcement last year as part of a commitment to UNESCO to protect dolphins, dugongs, turtles and sawfish sharks on the Great Barrier Reef.
By mid-2027, there will be no gillnet fisheries in the Great Barrier Reef, in the Gulf of Carpentaria, nor the Sandy Straits Marine Park.
We've been working in respect to Queensland fisheries for over a decade. We've seen some big reforms on the east coast with moves to quota for popular fish species like barramundi, and more recently we've had new net-free zones and also the announcement that gillnets are being phased out from the Great Barrier Reef. But the Gulf of Carpentaria has been left behind. And so we have been advocating, we've been working with fishers and with traditional owners to find out what a sustainable pathway is for the Gulf of Carpentaria when it comes to gillnetting.
David Wren has been using gillnets to catch predominantly grey mackerel in Gulf waters since 1989. This is how they work.
In simple terms, gillnet is what it is. You lay your net out in the water and basically strain the water and the fish run into it.
60 staff work on his 5 commercial boats, catching about 1,000 tonne of fish a year.
That's a massive, massive net. How big's that?
It is a long net. So each of the 3 big boats are allowed 1,800 metres a net, which is 5,600 metres. Now that's from 7 Mile to the AFZ, Australian Fishing Zone. There's 5,600 metres, that's all that's in there. 20 years ago, we knew it was overfished and we had to do something about it. So we bought all the licences and we handed 19,000 metres of net back to the government free of charge, and we've only got the 5,600 metres there now, and we believe we'll have a sustainable fishery forever.
How many licences were all of the licences?
There was 7 developmental permits and 6 N9s.
How does it work?
Whichever way the wind is blowing, we shoot the net, it goes out behind the boat, we steam with it and just slowly, just a couple of knots, and then every 30 metres we clip a net on. Because what you've got to remember, we're pelagic from the surface down, we don't fish the bottom, and that's important. And then the boat just drifts and hangs off the net, so the wind blowing on the boat keeps it taut, but not too tight.
So you're not dragging the net behind the boat as it's still going, you're just letting the tide do that?
Just letting the tide and the wind do it.
When Landline visited Corumba, the boats were getting ready for an uncertain season. When did you first learn about the gillnet ban?
When it was announced last year on the East Coast, where they're just going to shut it down, we just didn't think they'd come around here so quickly, but they have. And they're on a real roll now, and it appears that, we're in their firing line.
Third-generation barramundi fisherman David DJ Lane uses gill nets in the Norman River, which flows into the Gulf.
So this is our regulated mesh size, the minimum mesh size for the Gulf carp area, which is 6.5 inch. It's a break and strain of line 50. So basically this targets their regulated fish sizes in the GOC, and any big animals potentially bounce off. And this break and strain of net is enough to withhold the barramundi and other estuary fish that we target, but yet the bigger animals can break through, and the big barra, any broodstock stuff can bust through it freely. Sharks and stuff can just bounce off the net. So, and it's designed basically to have a little bit of movement, so if anything hits it, it can go with it and bust out. So
how much interaction do you reckon you get?
Well, last year I only got one crocodile. We take steps to minimise those sort of interactions with these creeks. Like we just did before, we assessed the area and had a look for any crocodile activity on the banks, and if there was crocodiles around the area, we'll move on somewhere else. We've got something here.
When you do get a croc or something caught in it that shouldn't be in there, what do you do with it?
Well, basically just release it alive, unharmed, as carefully as possible. But in our operation, I get the crew to come and see me, so I assist them. That way there's no chance of injuries to my crew. Get the animals released, we cut the net, let it out, and we record it in the TEPS book.
Commercial barra fishers like Scotty and DJ use gill nets for quantity of catch, and they say there's no way that they can get the same amount with line fishing.
Oh no, look, there we go. That's a beautiful fish.
But Simon Miller from the Australian Marine Conservation Society doesn't see it that way.
Now, line fishing is one method that you can have a sustainable wild-caught barramundi, and the reason for that is because it simply doesn't have that impact on the threatened species. There isn't that bycatch of iconic threatened species like dugongs and sawfish. Now, whether that's going to work for the entire industry remains to be seen. Now, as part of the phasing out of gill nets on the East Coast in the Great Barrier Reef, the Queensland Government and the Fisheries Research and Development Corporation have put together some money, I think about $9 million, to run trials of alternate gears. So while gill net fishing is being phased out there, there's an opportunity to trial alternate gears.
A James Cook University report found climate and weather were largely responsible for the negative impact on dugong populations. To help protect them, the report recommended a reduction in non-climate impacts by decreasing the risk of incidental capture of dugongs in gill nets. Queensland's Minister for Agriculture and Fisheries, Mark Ferner, outlined reasons for the ban in correspondence with David Wren in November last year, saying gill net fishing is under scrutiny globally and Gulf fisheries need to be mindful of their social licence. An outline of the changes to gill net regulations were due to be released in early April for implementation on May 17. But at the time of broadcast, these still hadn't been made available to Gulf fishers. On the 19th of April, just moments before our deadline, Landline received a statement from Minister Ferner. It says, an announcement is imminent and that it will give industry and communities certainty and confidence for a sustainable Gulf fishing industry.
Landline made numerous requests for an interview with Queensland's Fishery Minister, Mark Ferner, but was told he was unavailable. A representative from the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries initially agreed to an interview, but later withdrew.
Corumba's Mayor Jack Bowden says beef production, mining and tourism are the other major industries in the region. But commercial fishing is what keeps the town going.
I'm worried about the impact that losing them's going to have on us.
What do you think the impact's going to be?
It's going to be devastating. It's going to cruel Corumba like you wouldn't believe. There's a whole lot of support industry that rely on the fishermen for survival. The fishermen are their bread and butter. The tourists, yeah, they're good when they're here, but look at us now. We're coming into April and you can't find a caravan anywhere because the roads are cut.
You can't get through.
You can't get in. So But the fishermen have been here since the season, you know, like, so they keep the economy ticking over.
Barramundi barbecue happening.
Yvonne Tunney's businesses are built around tourism, but agrees there are limitations.
Our challenges, telecommunications, road access, the cost of living out here, all of those things.
She says suggestions that restrictions on gill netting will lead to an increase in recreational fishing tourism don't stack up.
One of the most concerning comments we get, it's going to thrive. This place is going to go crazy ballistic. And we all go, why? It's always been here. It's actually a long way from anywhere. It costs money to get here. You actually have to plan a trip to come to Corumba, whereas if you want to go fishing off the east coast, you know, most people live within an hour or 2 hours of the east coast. They can just go there for a weekend, go home again. So Corumba is a very different type of destination.
Noah Scott, a publican in Normanton, the next closest town to Corumba, took his concerns about Gulf gillnet restrictions to Canberra.
We live in a remote area. Our economy is extremely fragile. We're very limited with options for work, play, money, etc. We're already doing it tough in relation to housing. Our cost of living is absolutely astronomical compared to what you fellas are all used to. Loaves of bread can cost up to $7 to $10, you know, it's ridiculous. So the loss of another industry in our area is going to contribute to the loss of services.
All right, you've got fish?
Queensland National Senator and Shadow Minister for Northern Australia, Susan McDonald, organised the Barra Barbecue at Parliament House to bring golf fishers and business people to the nation's capital.
These communities fish to a very high standard. They don't operate to the extent of their approvals. They operate in a very sustainable and managed way. But these towns are more than just fishing communities. They are our front line for home affairs, for border security. This will devastate fishing communities, not just the fishermen, the equipment that they have, the jobs that they provide, the packing sheds that they work to, but the chandlers, the net makers, the motor mechanics. There will be a flow-on effect into these regional communities that the government has not examined. There has been no regulatory impact statement or study done on the impact of shutting down gillnet fishing, particularly in the Gulf of Carpentaria.
But not all locals like gillnets. Traditional owner Fred Pascoe sees the benefit of aspects of the ban.
You need to be told that people in Normanton would welcome the closure of commercial fishing in the rivers, not necessarily around Corumba out in the Gulf, but certainly around the rivers. Indigenous people have been pushing for that for years. And quite frankly, a lot of white people in Normanton too, if they're entirely honest, they would welcome the closure of commercial fishing in the Norman River.
Fred says he can see both sides and believes there's a place for the commercial fishers in the Gulf.
One of the other big concerns I've got is a lot of those fishermen are the eyes and ears of our coastline because they're out there earning a living on it. If they're not out there, what's stopping the fishermen coming from places like Indonesia, from some of those Asian countries, what's stopping them coming down and raping and pillaging our waters? You know, we have an issue now with ghost nets, with drift nets that most of them come from those illegal fishing boats. So who's going to police that if those Australian commercial fishing fellas aren't out there?
With very few job prospects other than working for the local council, Fred hopes gillnet restrictions could create other opportunities for his people.
I'm a big supporter of economic development, particularly in my mob with Indigenous people and Indigenous communities. So the smart people tell you in everything that's seen as a disaster, if you look hard enough, there may be opportunities in there. I don't know what it looks like. I haven't got a clue, whether it's aquaculture on land, whether it's whatever. But I think there may well be an opportunity to arise for Aboriginal people to get some economic benefits out of this.
The gillnet fishers maintain they are the best guardians of these waters, with a healthy restocking program that started in the 80s, now under the local council's jurisdiction. They also say they value threatened, endangered or protected species, or TEPs.
Rarely we'll get a saw shark, but that's a contentious issue at the moment. But we have the ability to release these animals alive and unharmed quickly and efficiently because we're here, we're on the gear all the time. The industry here has always been proactive in that sort of management of TEP interactions or minimising it. So that's what we do, but unfortunately we're constantly under the microscope and there's a lot of non-facts getting around about our industry at the moment.
With the regulations imminent, Yvonne Tunney says the town is bracing for the unknown.
This is a core industry. We're already a fragile economy because we're a very small, remote economy, and they can just come in and make radical changes without considering what it's going to do. We're worried about our schools shutting, our childcare shutting. How do you attract staff, and what businesses are going to be here to have those staff anyway? We already have trouble because of the kind of challenges we face out here. It's just going to make it worse, but we don't know those answers because that work hasn't even been thought of.
David Wren is looking at an uncertain future for not just the town, but himself, his adult children and grandchildren.
This was our retirement. You've had 40 years of work and you invest back into the business, abiding by all the rules at the time, and then you get to the end of your working career, finally hand it over to your boys so that you can retire, and all of a sudden it's worth nothing. So, yeah, it's a big kick in the guts.
East Coast gillnet fishers have been offered a buyback on their licences, but those in the Gulf are still waiting.
We won't stop fighting. We're fighting for our future. We're fighting for our life. If I came to you and said, I'm going to give you $2,000 for your $500,000 house, get out, you would fight me. Why wouldn't I fight?
Hello, I'm Tim Lee. Still to come on Landline, a special Anzac Day story. Out of the tragedy of war, one family's generous gift to the nation and to agricultural research.
Hello, I'm Jane Norman. The Senate inquiry into the big supermarkets has wrapped up 2 days of hearings at Parliament House. It's one of several investigations underway examining profits and pricing. But for farmers and consumers wanting answers, the Headline Act didn't quite deliver as expected. Greens Senator and Committee Chair Nick McKim clashed with outgoing Woolworths chief Brad Banducci as he tried to find some data on the company's return on equity figures, presumably to shine a spotlight on Woolies' profits. Mr Banducci didn't want to talk about return on equity, so he was reminded if he treats the Senate with contempt, he could end up in jail for 6 months.
Do you know what the return on equity for your corporation was in the last financial year?
Senator, that is not what I focus on. I don't know what the number is specifically. Happy to take the question on notice.
You don't know?
I focus on what is key for us.
Please, this is important, Mr Banducci. This is very important because it is open to the Senate to hold you in contempt, and that carries potential sanctions, including up to 6 months imprisonment for you.
Senator, I've tried to be very specific in saying what we focus on. That is where my focus is. So return on investment, $1 rent, and what our return is out, and what is our shareholder return. Those are the numbers I focus on.
The boss of Coles did have an answer for senators before defending her supermarket's price structures.
I am happy to share with you that our return on equity last year was 31%. In the last couple of years, we have seen an unprecedented amount of cost price increases come through.
The inquiry is due to report back to the Senate in May. Australia's troubled chemical regulator will stay put in Armidale in northern New South Wales, despite an independent report recommending the agency return to Canberra. In 2016, then Agriculture Minister Barnaby Joyce made the controversial decision to move the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority to his electorate in the Northern Tablelands. It resulted in the loss of about 90% of the agency's staff. A review last year found the regulator had been captured by industry interests and had received multiple misconduct complaints, including allegations a staff member urinated on colleagues at a Christmas party. A recent evaluation by retired senior public servant Ken Matthews made several recommendations, including that the authority be returned to Canberra. But Agriculture Minister Murray Watt says that won't be happening, citing the chaos and disruption caused by the last move.
I think it's very important that our Australian National Regulator of Agricultural and Veterinary Chemicals is independent of government and is seen to be independent of government. However, In an attempt to ensure that we do always get the best people to work at the APVMA, we will be following Mr Matthews' recommendation to remove the restriction, the only one of its kind in the entire public service, which forced workers to be based in Armidale.
An outback Queensland cattle station has been acquired by the state government for conservation, thanks to an anonymous $21 million donation. The purchase of Vergemont Station near Longreach will conserve nearly 350,000 hectares, which, to give you some sense of scale, is larger in size than the ACT. The acquisition by the Queensland Government was completed with the support of the Nature Conservancy, to which the donation was made. The working cattle station has been on the market since 2016 and is a key habitat for endangered and vulnerable species like the night parrot and the yellow-footed rock wallaby. The sale follows the acquisition of nearby Tonkaroo and Melrose stations to expand existing national parks and protected areas in the state. And finally, to Popeye the Pumpkin Man, who's proven dreams really do come true. For years, Adam Farquharson, a former Commodore of the Tumut Canoe Club, had been trying to grow a pumpkin big enough to paddle. Well, opportunity knocked when he discovered his mate Mark Peacock had not only succeeded in growing a monster pumpkin, but was planning on using the prize-winning squash for stock feed. Farquharson had other ideas. He hollowed out the 407-kilogram pumpkin, donned a sailor's hat and pipe, and delighted locals by sailing Cinderella down the Tumut River in southern New South Wales. He reckons he's the first person to achieve that feat on that waterway at least. His famed vessel will now end up, as originally intended, feeding cattle. And that's Landline News.
Margaret River is a relative newcomer in Australia's wine industry, with barely 50 years of history. Landline's Sean Murphy reports on the oldest brand's new obsession.
It's all hand-picking at the oldest block of vines in Margaret River. They were planted by pioneering winemaker Dr. Tom Cullity, who established the Vasse Felix vineyard in 1967. Today, the historic Cabernet vines still produce one of the finest drops in the region. Even an unprecedented warm, dry spring and the earliest harvest in living memory hasn't affected the latest vintage.
What we're seeing in the cellar right now is beyond our expectations. We had a big fear that the reds might be a bit jammy, a bit curranty because it's been a bit warm, but we're remarkably surprised at the freshness and vibrance that we're getting from this season.
For more than 50 vintages, Vasse Felix has been a benchmark in a region that only produces 2% of Australia's grape crush, but boasts 20% of its premium wines. The estate has become a beacon of excellence for its fine wines, fine dining and promotion of fine art. But it's not just the climate that's changing. Now, more than half a century after Tom Cullity's vision took shape, there's a new obsession, an idée fixe, as the French would say, and it all begins here. In the coolest, wettest, cloudiest part of southern Margaret River, they're growing Chardonnay grapes that are changing perceptions of what the region is famous for. Businessman Paul Holmes à Court loves a challenge.
It's early, but I suppose it's never too early.
Never too early for idée fixe.
At the height of the global financial crisis in 2008, he bought out the rest of his family to take on Vasse Felix and the Holmes à Court pastoral holdings in northern Australia. Now he's betting big on a Blanc de Blanc champagne-style sparkling Chardonnay, an investment that some observers say is costing about $40 million.
So idée fixe, it means the great obsession. Has this become a great obsession for you?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, Margaret River is an obsession for us, and Chardonnay is an obsession. And we've always, for 40 years, more than 40 years, we've made sparkling wine in the traditional champagne method. So it made sense for it to all come together when we discovered this surprise block down in Carradale.
As part of a buying spree in 2010 to consolidate the company's supply chain, Paul Holmes Court bought this Carradale block near Augusta, but its Chardonnay failed to meet the company's high standards. A last-ditch experiment to make sparkling wine was an instant hit.
Besides the clonal material being suited to sparkling wine production, we're very close to the Southern Ocean here. We're 10 kilometres to the Southern Ocean, 10 kilometres to the Indian Ocean. So there's a big maritime influence here, and you can feel it today, this sort of constant air conditioning coming through here, which keeps everything quite cool. And that really is quite helpful for making sparkling base.
We'll drop the dipstick in down here somewhere, Sean.
The vineyard manager, Tristan Moore, reckons the block's unique soil profile may also be a factor. It's on a geological fault line about 60 kilometres from the gravelly loam duplex soils of Margaret River's more famous Willie Abrup area.
And do you know enough about the soil yet to know why it's throwing up Chardonnay that's ideal for sparkling?
Yeah, we're still getting our heads around it. It is a unique soil. This position we're at, we're right next to what's known as the Dunsborough fault line. And interestingly, we get a lot of this quartz breccia through it. And this is through the whole vineyard at varying depths. Pretty unique, not something I've seen in Margaret River before.
The company is now producing 6,000 cases of Idé Fix annually, with plans to double production. It's already selling around Australia and into 9 export markets. The unique bottle shape meant the company needed a standalone winery with custom-made production lines and storage.
Idé Fix, at the end of the day, it is a gamble. Is there a plan B?
No.
That's it?
It has to work. It's going to work. When you go to choose a bottle like that and everything is custom made for it, there is no plan B. That equipment can't be reused by anybody else. Yeah, it's a deep, deep commitment to go all the way.
Well, I think it was a huge gamble to go down this path. I mean, Vasse Felix established as one of the preeminent small producers in Australia, certainly Margaret River, for red wine, and some very good white wines too, outstanding. But to go down this path was, I think, a major gamble. Good help.
Wine writer and publisher of the WA Wine Review, Ray Jordan, reckons the gamble is paying off, and the entire Margaret River region will benefit.
This can be a leader. It can show that Margaret River as a whole can actually produce good sparkling wine. So even some of the other ones that are stylistically different, I think they'll benefit from sort of within this sort of umbrella of sparkling wine.
The Idé Fix investment is about more than a sparkling wine. The former watershed vineyard south of Margaret River town site is being rebuilt as a Blanc de Blanc house with a bistro, cellar door and viewing platforms into the winery. The concept is a one-stop immersive experience.
So people will be able to come here and, of course, enjoy the wine, enjoy the view and eat in the bistro. But on top of that, they'll be able to learn all the details about how this special product is made.
Should we have a look at this one?
Absolutely.
Winemakers Brendan Carr and Casey Economides have taken up the challenge to produce a specialty wine in an area previously thought to be too warm for traditional method sparkling.
Very zesty, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Probably get ready for blending soon, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. It's looking ready. Margaret River and sparkling wine don't necessarily go hand in hand. The wines are doing fantastically well. The quality is taking everyone by surprise. But we sort of generally believe in the project. We've got the vineyard in the right region, in the right location. We've got the right climate, the right soil, the right clones, hopefully the right winemaking technique.
Unlike still wines, sparkling wines are not just fermented in the tank. A second fermentation takes place in the bottle, and this adds layers of time and production. The bottles need riddling, constant turning to force yeast into the neck so that it can be easily removed. By hand, the process can take up to 6 weeks.
You'd have someone in a French cave that would be riddling it away they could do anywhere from 30 to 40,000 bottles a day, but that little half turn or a quarter turn per day, it's a long, exhaustive process. While here, this machine will move every 2 hours, 24 hours of the day, and in 4 to 6 days, it's done.
The yeast is then removed or disgorged, and the winemakers have a chance to further influence the final product. Testing samples is an ongoing, essential part of the process to find the right balance between acid, sugar and fruit flavours.
Essentially, this is our last chance as winemakers to put the finishing touches on the wine. So often, even though it's a dry, sparkling wine, it'll get about anywhere from 3 to 5 grams per litre of sugar.
It can take more than 5 years to produce a vintage.
We're leaving our wines in bottle in that method traditionnel sense for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, sometimes even longer. So between that specialised equipment and all the time required to make, hopefully, the best blancs we can, it's a real labour of love.
The only way this works is if we maintain this approach, this commitment, this investment, this obsession all the way through.
An obsession Paul Holmes à Court believes ultimately can stay ahead of declining wine consumption. People are drinking less, but they're more discerning about what they drink.
I think it will be a real eye-opener for people and will build people's understanding and their appreciation, and it'll be good for Margaret River, obviously, good for Australian premium sparkling wines generally, for people to come and learn more about the process. So that's what we're doing.
G'day, I'm Matt Brand. Dry conditions are biting in the big state of Western Australia. There's winter crop being planted into soils with not enough moisture, hay supplies are tight, and livestock prices in the west are crumbling, especially for sheep. Here's a look at the National Mutton Indicator. Here's the New South Wales Mutton Indicator. And then there's WA, where mutton is about a third of the price. Around 300 farmers attended a crisis meeting during the week in the small WA town of Yornup, with the group calling for the government to help with hay and freight subsidies. There's a lot of anger in the West about the federal government's policy to phase out the live sheep trade, which many feel is making the situation worse.
Well, look, you have to go back to what the genesis of the problem is. It was a dry season that started last year, and we weren't able to, put the pressure relief valve on, i.e. with live export. And so there's been a massive build-up of sheep and cattle on farms, which contributes to the mental health. So if they really want to solve people's mental health problems, let us do what we do, which is export livestock.
The boats used to come in regularly, and now, the boats aren't coming in because they put too much regulation in. And now they've created an animal welfare problem in Western Australia. And if people could have shifted their livestock when they wanted to shift their livestock, we wouldn't be here today.
One sheep producer in WA took to social media this week saying that he was getting ready to shoot about 3,000 head and was organising a neighbour to go and dig a pit. His Twitter post, viewed by over 500,000 people, putting further pressure, no doubt, on WA's Ag Minister to do something.
To be clear, I have never said that farmers should euthanise livestock. Nobody wants to see that happen. I am obviously concerned by the current dry season conditions, which is why 7 months ago we held a round table with industry and we asked Indepth to actually pull together a dry season response team. Since then, we've had a long hot summer and a dry start to autumn, which is why I've now pulled together the dry season task force.
So will a government task force be able to help farmers in WA? We'll wait and see. Across Australia this week, sheep and lamb prices took a hit. The light lamb indicator fell nearly $1 a kilo, and a big reason for that was disruptions in air freight to the Middle East caused by the conflict between Iran and Israel. Various sale yards on Monday reported light lambs falling by $20 to $40 a head because processors stopped buying what's known as MK or bag lambs. Iran has become a really important market for Aussie lamb this year and is currently our 4th largest customer behind the US, China and Dubai. Overseas demand is keeping abattoirs busy. According to MLA, the combined weekly slaughter of sheep and lambs the previous week hit an all-time high of about 692,000 animals, driven largely by a record sheep kill. The wool market benefited from a fall in dollar this week. Prices were up and the clearance rate was one of the highest seen for quite some time. Meanwhile, the latest wool production forecast shows Australia's wool clip continues to fall. Shorn production is expected to drop this year in all states except New South Wales and South Australia. And would you like to guess which state's wool production is falling the most? I'll give you a little hint. It's the state where farmers are having crisis meetings. Cattle prices were down this week as numbers lifted again, especially in Queensland. With roads drying out, Roma yarded an extra 5,500 head compared to the previous sale. The Barkly Highway in the Northern Territory reopened to triple road trains on Thursday after being closed for about 2 weeks by flooding. As one exporter told me, the sun's out, the dragonflies are out, mustering's underway and it's all systems go. Demand from Indonesia is solid, but there's a lot of cattle in the north which has seen prices ease. It's starting to rain in the US and there's an expectation it will help the states produce a large cotton crop this year. Cotton futures have now slipped below 80 cents a pound for the first time in 4 months, and sugar has dipped below the 20-cent mark to its lowest level since early last year. Big crops in the Black Sea region are also weighing heavy on the futures market, with reports that Ukraine is on track to export a record amount of soybeans this year. In the domestic market, barley prices lifted across all major port zones. Clear Grain Exchange says the number of buyers for Aussie grain is noticeably on the rise.
As we're speaking, Israel, there's that conflict. Israel's bombing Iran, and we're actually seeing markets responding to that as well. So there's a lot of risk still to play out here, Matt, in terms of there's a lot of uncertainty around how much supply of grain is going to be available in 2024, and buyers are reacting in a way that suggests they want some more cover. They need grain. So that intensity around grain demand for growers has really lifted.
And finally, one of Australasia's largest plant-based meat manufacturers is shutting down, with its chief executive declaring the plant-based bubble has burst. Since 2015, Sunfed Meats has made products such as chicken-free chicken and bull-free beef. But in a very blunt message on Facebook, the chief executive said investor appetite for these sort of products had gone.
It is a fact that the plant-based bubble burst, and the category has been undergoing a reality check, and rightly so. Fueled by easy VC money, the category became saturated with junk food masked as healthy, and people now see through that. The reality remains that Sunfed was not able to complete its phase 4, and with the unfavourable market conditions, I had to make the responsible decision of shutting the company down in a solvent, orderly fashion.
That is the Landline check on prices. Keep it rural.
Ahead of Anzac Day on Thursday, we're bringing you a story about a pioneering grazing family which donated a property in memory of 2 of its own who died during World War II. It's part of a trust dedicated to agricultural research and education. And as Landline's Tim Lee discovered, there's an incredible link between the past and the present.
Historic homesteads abound with amazing stories, but none quite like Old Kooree near Jerilderie in southern New South Wales. It's the story of a generation lost in war and a grieving family's generous bequest, a special trust to commemorate their loved ones. The walls of the stately dining room tell some of the story.
Started in 1945 with the death of, in 1943, of two members of the family. David McPherson killed in Northern Australia in the Air Force, and Michael McCackey was killed in New Guinea in 1943 fighting the Japanese.
And this is a depiction of where Michael McCackey was killed?
Yes, that's correct. That's Shaggy Ridge, which is up in the Finisterre Ranges in northwestern Papua New Guinea. A lot of brutal fighting and many young Australians and Japanese killed there.
The McCackey clan was one of Australia's most prominent, wealthy and innovative pastoral families. Most notably, Samuel McCackey, one of the greatest forces in the development of irrigation and livestock industries in Australia.
So, Michael, this is Sir Samuel McCackey?
That's correct, yes. An Irishman from Northern Ireland who came out in the 1860s, the first of the McCackey family.
This giant windmill in Jerilderie was one of his countless innovations. In today's currency, Sam McCackey was a billionaire, one of the nation's more publicly minded ones.
In the end, he amassed purportedly 3 million acres and 1 million sheep. And then towards the end of his life, he sold all these stations up. By the time of his death in 1919, he didn't own one station or one sheep, and then bequested all his money away to Australia and Australians.
Sam's brother David bought Kooree, a vast property, with its fine homestead in 1881, and it remained in the family. His grandson Michael was the male heir in line to inherit it. But with his death, in 1945, his uncle Roy made a similar generous gesture to memorialise the family's wartime loss.
It was a tragedy for the family. They were seen as the bright young stars of the family who'd take over rural holdings. So as a response to that, their uncle Roy McCackey, who became Sir Roy McCackey, started a trust in their memory. And the aims of the trust were agricultural research, education and extension, a fairly broad remit, and it still goes on today doing that. So the Old Kooree is owned by the McCackey Memorial Institute, which is a trust set up by the McCackey family and still run by a trust which involves some members of the McCackey family.
It could be said that the benefits to be derived by the pastoral and grazing industries as a result of this work here at the McCackey Memorial Institute are almost unbounded and will only be limited by the funds available.
Originally, the property was 10,000 hectares, but by the 1970s, the trust was struggling.
The tough times in the 70s, Sir Roy McCackey had been funding it to some extent. He died in the early 70s, and then wool prices collapsed, sheep prices collapsed. So roughly 20,000 acres was sold off to generate some capital to keep the place alive.
Today, the property is almost 2,000 hectares in size and leased by Sunrise Australia for a broad range of research work. That revenue, along with donations and other investments, funds the Memorial Trust.
The aspect of doing things positively for rural Australia with this bequest is still close to the heart of the Trust. And yeah, we continue to do so.
We've developed it over the last 30 years as a partnership with the McCackey Trust to be able to do and showcase research for the rice industry.
Today, Sunrise is hosting a field day for the rice industry and the wider public, who are flocked to see attractions including celebrity chef Po Lin Yao and view the innovative research work being done in rice crop development. These fields are only weeks away from harvest, when the new varieties will be analysed and evaluated.
It's pretty well critical to have a dedicated facility just for rice as such. Focused very much on the rice industry in the Riverina, looking at opportunities where we can improve the profitability of rice growing and the sustainability of rice growing for the riverina rice growers.
That includes achieving more efficient water and fertiliser use and other agronomic improvements. The Mackackie Trust carefully selects and funds emerging young ag scientists to advance their work. Michael Gregory, named after his uncle Michael Mackackie, is the chair.
On an annual basis, we hand out something between $150,000 and $200,000 a year for research and education.
And it's working hard to increase its financial commitment.
And we see it as a really useful thing. I mean, agriculture always needs research and extension, and we've got to get bright young Australians into agriculture. It's a competition now because there's a lot of city jobs that look glamorous, but we need young Australians in agriculture.
J. Moore Lambert studied environmental science at university and imagined himself working on remote mine sites in outback Australia. Instead, the young Sydney-sider now finds himself with sunrice among the lush bays of rice at Old Kooree, measuring CO2 and methane emissions from rice grown using various production methods.
And I like to think we're on the bleeding edge of rice research. We're doing everything from water management, automation, nitrogen, to greenhouse gases and cold tolerance and stuff. We've got all sorts of stuff going here, and it's a really exciting place for someone to come and to look at or to work at.
It's just the gift that keeps on giving. It is an amazing resource for researchers. So we're trying to identify genotypes or varieties that are adapted for climate change, for reduced water availability and cold temperature tolerance. That's our major goal.
The screening of 1,700 genotypes has yielded some very promising results.
The learnings that we capture from Australia can help feed the world.
Sunrice exports to around 50 countries, and it has a subsidiary, Trukai, in Papua New Guinea. It's developing the country's fledgling rice industry and helping to address rural malnutrition. Sponsored by Sunrice, Ina Davis first came to Old Kooree 10 years ago.
I grew up eating rice, but it's not a staple crop. It's not widely grown. It's like an introduced crop for us to grow.
She's one of a number from PNG who over the years have benefited from what they've learned here.
Yes, and she's developed a program over there to teach smallholder farmers how to grow rice.
There's a rather extraordinary, very poignant link to the brave young soldier who lost his life there in 1943.
Ina, this is the boardroom. Yep. Take a look at this. Do you recognise it?
I do.
Tell me about it.
This mountain range is like a fenestrary range that separates the province where I come from and work.
This painting by war artist Douglas Pratt shows Shaggy Ridge, including Maccackie's Knoll.
It separates. And from the valley you can see clearly this mountain, and I have farmers in the valley and I work around those farmers, drive up and down and visit them, and this mountain is iconic. It really gives you a kind of a special feeling that, people here in this place, somehow you get to connect with history.
War in the most inhospitable country on earth, and all the heroes are not in the front line.
Our story has uncovered new details about Michael Mackackie.
I feel there's a pretty good example of just how difficult the terrain was in New Guinea.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a good shot of them trying to get a jeep across a creek. Could be actually around Shaggy Ridge area.
Philip Bradley's father fought at the Battle of Shaggy Ridge alongside Michael Mackackie.
You can see the climate as well. So if you akin it to a bread knife, so it's sharp, but it's also going up and down with serrations, with the different knolls. And these little knolls, or pimples as they call them, were what they had to fight for along this ridge.
This is the Ramu Valley. Lovely, deadly. But Australian soldiers have fought their way 100 miles along it, lived in it, have died in it.
As long as the Japanese had the highest point, they could look back into the Ramu Valley and see what the Australians and Americans were doing. They could see the air base there, what was happening, and they could also direct shelling onto those troops as they came up.
so the ridge had to be captured. During months of fierce fighting in late 1943, the Australians inched forward.
So the trees came up over the ridge, so the Japanese would aim their shells to hit those trees and create a shrapnel burst down onto the troops. So Makaki had his men then try to cut down the trees, but they couldn't get them all down. And then in the afternoon, another shelling started, and 2 men were badly wounded.
Makaki called for stretcher bearers, but with the shells still falling, no one came forward.
So he says, "Oh, bugger it, I'll do it myself." So he ran out, bravely ran out, and got to the wounded guy, Wally Offer, and was just treating him when another shell came over. And Jack Bidner, who'd been wounded, he'd woken up by now, and he told me, he said, Makaki basically took the full blast. And he was lying there. Jack Bidner's nickname was Blondie. He said, "Blondie, I've had it." And they called a guy forward, Ross Younger, who got him back to the aid post, but he died before, within an hour or so, he was dead. And they buried him up there on the ridge.
This is his grave, a photo taken during the war. After the war, his body was reinterred at Lae. This was the second tragedy to befall the family that same year. Michael's first cousin, Sergeant David McPherson, was killed in a plane crash in Northern Australia. David McPherson's death was equally harrowing. He was a sergeant in the Royal Australian Air Force, an air gunner, and on the 4th of February 1943, he was attached to the Dutch East Indies Air Force, and the plan was to go on a long-distance bombing raid into the Pacific Theatre in a Mitchell bomber. But as the plane took off from Batchelor Airfield, south of Darwin, heavily laden with bombs and fuel, the engine failed and it crashed in a fiery explosion, killing all 9 on board, including 22-year-old David. It's a sacrifice not lost on J. Moore Lambert. He's 22, the same age as David McPherson and Michael Makaki when their lives were cut short.
It's pretty crazy to think that people my age were doing these heroic acts in countries they never even thought about before, and yet here I am just on a farm doing research.
But to have something to come out of that that's benefited the research in agriculture and particular research in rice is a fantastic legacy for those guys.
I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live.
Every Anzac Day you think, what if they'd survived? But this is an old story, Australia-wide, rural Australia-wide. I mean, so many young rural Australians were killed in both wars, many wars. And yeah, what if? So it's a little thing we can do to keep their memories going. And their portraits are on the wall here, and yeah, they watch over many a board meeting.
Australia and PNG will always be that close because of all the history that came through together, and Australians were up there with PNG to fight for the war, and they are the heroes they are.
G'day, I'm Courtney Wilson, and today we're along a stretch of an old stock route in Queensland's Burnett region, about 65 k's west of Eidsvold. Next week on Landline, we hit the road with a mob of drovers, raising money for life-saving services in the bush. Join us for the journey on the Eidsvold Cattle Drive.
And that's the program for today. If you want to catch up on any of Landline's programs during the year, they're all on iView. I'll leave you now with the weekly weather update. Bye for now.
G'day from the Bureau for Sunday, the 21st of April. It's been a wet weekend across parts of Queensland and New South Wales, with rain and storms impacting southeast Queensland and showers about the New South Wales coast. Today, rain will ease to showers in southeast Queensland, with showers contracting also to northeast New South Wales. Further south, a large high pressure system is bringing sunny, mild to warm and dry weather across much of the country, tending cooler with a few clouds in parts of the southeast but remaining dry. Monday, we'll see showers continue about the Queensland and northeast New South Wales coast, while high pressure brings dry, mild to warm weather for much of the southeast, just apart from some showers in Tasmania. Further west, a weak cold front will bring cooler air and light coastal showers to southwest WA, but no rainfall for inland areas really needing it. Tuesday, we'll see a cold front approach southeast Australia, but remain dry, while showers will continue to ease along the Queensland and New South Wales coast, but continue about the far tropical north with isolated storms also possible. Showers, gusty winds and much cooler conditions will sweep across Tasmania and Victoria on Wednesday. Showers will clear the east coast and easterly winds return to WA, bringing dry, sunny weather as large high pressure systems continue to keep the rain away. Thursday, we'll see a large, slow-moving high-pressure system move into the Bight, bringing cool to cold weather for the southeast, with light showers about coastal parts of South Australia, Victoria, Tasmania and New South Wales for those attending dawn services. Elsewhere, it will be dry and cooler, tending warmer in WA. Friday and into the weekend, high pressure will continue to bring dry and sunny weather to much of the country, apart from some showers in WA, Tasmania, southern Victoria and coastal parts of Queensland and New South Wales. And that's it for our weekly wrap. We'll see you again next Sunday.